Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, January 9th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Netanyahu sees war on Lebanon as key to his survival. So this is based on a report from the Washington Post that said some U.S. officials are concerned that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu might see an expanded war in Lebanon as key to his political survival. And this is because this is something I've been covering quite a bit, how polling in Israel shows, and it's not just polling, it's also the political pressure that Netanyahu is coming under. But the majority of Israelis want Netanyahu to resign once Israel's operations in Gaza are over. And that gives Netanyahu every incentive to continue the slaughter in Gaza and to expand the situation into a regional war that could draw in the U.S. And of course, the main reason why there's this political reckoning happening for him is because the October 7th attack happened, when there's all these signs that, Israel should have had enough intelligence, enough information to prevent it, or to at least fight the initial attack instead of let Hamas, and get that far into southern Israel. So what's interesting here about this report is that it says these U.S. officials think that Hezbollah and its leader Nasrallah don't want an escalation and don't want to see a wider war. And I think that's important, because if this thing does escalate and get really bad and turns into a major Israel-Lebanon war that the U.S. is supporting with military aid, and who knows how far the U.S. will intervene in that conflict. But I think if that happens, we're going to see this narrative completely go away, that it was Israel and Netanyahu looking to provoke this war. They're going to spin some new narrative about the conflict. So even though, they're saying that Hezbollah does not want escalation, the two sides continue to trade very significant fire across the border, which has increased since Israel escalated the situation last week by launching a drone strike in Beirut that killed a senior Hamas official. So there was another big escalation on Monday. An Israeli airstrike in Lebanon killed a top Hezbollah commander, and we'll get more into that in the next story. But just showing that this situation could, is really volatile and could really explode. And I mean, it's already pretty heavy fire that they're trading. Hundreds of people, I believe, at this point have been killed in these exchanges. So, it could get, I think, to the point, this big escalation that the U.S. is worried about, I think, is a, Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon or really heavy attacks. And Israeli officials have continued to threaten a major war in Lebanon if Hezbollah does not move back from the Israeli border. In his latest threat, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that Israel could copy-paste, that's how we put it, copy-paste the destruction in Gaza into Beirut. And he said a few times that they could turn Beirut into Gaza. And that's a huge threat. Gallant has also said that Israel is open to diplomacy, but U.S. officials concede a deal with Hezbollah is unlikely as long as Israel is still killing Palestinians in Gaza. So this report also mentioned an intelligence assessment from the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency that found if the situation in Lebanon does escalate, Israel would have a hard time fighting Hezbollah. The Post report reads, quote, "A new secret assessment from the DIA found that it will be difficult for the Israeli Defense Forces to succeed because its military assets and resources would be spread too thin given the conflict in Gaza," end quote. The report said the U.S. is putting pressure on Israel not to escalate the situation, but as we know, they're not using any leverage. They're not even considering cutting off aid to Israel. And forget about just the military aid. Also, all the aircraft carriers. I know one has gone back to the U.S. since, but the U.S. has deployed these, warships and extra planes and more air defense systems to the region, with the implied threat that if things do really explode, the U.S. is going to intervene on Israel's behalf, more directly. So this is where we're at. And as I covered yesterday, U.S. officials told HuffPost that they believe President Biden's policy of unconditional military aid to Israel is going to embolden Israel to expand into Lebanon. And it could lead the U.S. into a major Mideast war. All right, so the next one here. Israel kills senior Hezbollah commander in airstrike in southern Lebanon. So this article is from Jason Ditz, and it is just covering this Israeli airstrike. So Israel carried out an airstrike on January 8th against the town of Kirbet Salem, assassinating Wissam Hassan Tawil, a senior Hezbollah commander. So Tawil, who's also known as El Haj Jawad, was killed when his vehicle was hit by an Israeli drone attack. Hezbollah confirmed the death, calling him the highest-ranking figure to be killed since the new war in the south began. Hezbollah issued a statement mourning of Tawil's loss, but at the same time downplayed the military significance of it, saying, quote, "The resistance is not a list of individuals that can be killed one by one," end quote. So Tawil was a commander of Hezbollah's Radwan Special Forces and acted as an advisor on military strategy in the south. However, while the Hezbollah expects to continue its fight against Israel relatively unaffected, his loss will be felt as a serious blow. So this drone strike came after a flurry of Hezbollah rocket fire badly damaged Israel's Mount Meron strategic airbase, which is a source of air control for northern Israel. And that was, Hezbollah said that was a preliminary response to the Israeli drone strike in Beirut. All right, so the next one here. Israel to tell Blinken that Palestinians cannot return to the north. So Axios reported on Monday that Israeli officials are expected to tell Secretary of State Antony Blinken that Israel will not allow Palestinians who fled North Gaza to return home until a new hostage deal is reached with Hamas. Blinken is in the region, and he is due to meet with Israeli officials on Tuesday. So on Sunday, during a visit to Qatar, Blinken said, quote, "Palestinian civilians must be able to return home as soon as conditions allow," end quote. And his comments came amid all this global backlash over comments from Israeli ministers who are calling for the expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. The U.S. has framed this position as a fringe Israeli view, and Israeli President David Herzog is trying to downplay this as well. He insisted that it's not the policy of the government, despite media reports, Israeli media reports, saying otherwise, saying that it is becoming an official policy of the government. But Netanyahu, the important point here is that Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, has said that he's looking for other countries to absorb Palestinians. And it's an idea that's increasingly popular in the Knesset. And we'll get more into that. There's another story about some things that some Israeli Knesset members have been saying about this. So in response to Blinken's comments about Palestinians returning to the north, where most buildings and homes have been destroyed, I mean, that's the thing. How long is it going to take to rebuild? It's something like 70 to 80% of the buildings in North Gaza have been destroyed in this area. So what are they going to return home to? But anyway, so an Israeli official told Axios, quote, "We are not going to allow Palestinians to go back to their homes in northern Gaza if there is no progress with the release of hostages," end quote. A new hostage deal became much less likely after Israel drone striked Beirut and killed the Hamas official Salah el-Aruri, who was involved in negotiations, who played a key role in the hostage deal that resulted in the releasing of over 100 Israelis and over 200 Palestinians. So they have them killing the negotiators and saying, we can't let the Palestinian civilians go back to the north until Hamas, reaches a deal with us. So basically using kind of collective punishment against the Palestinian civilians as their leverage. So that's the situation. And Qatar has said that Israeli drone strike really made things more complicated. So I saw Monday that the Gazan Health Ministry updated the death toll. So they're saying now over 23 Palestinians have been killed in this. And I believe that's around 9,000 children, which is just horrific to think about. All right, so the next one here, Gaza ceasefire protesters interrupt Biden speech. So protesters calling for a ceasefire in Gaza interrupted President Biden during a speech at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and that was the scene of the 2015 shooting committed by Dylan Roof that killed 9 people. So one protester shouted, quote, "If you really care about the lives lost here, you should honor the lives lost and call for a ceasefire in Gaza," end quote. And then others began chanting, "Ceasefire now." So as the protesters were escorted out, Biden supporters chanted 4 more years. And, there's just something about people calling for a ceasefire and then people chanting 4 more years. Like, are you saying 4 more years of war? And then President Biden said that he understood the passion of the people who interrupted his speech. Biden then claimed that he's been, quote, "quietly working with the Israeli government to get them to reduce and significantly get out of Gaza," end quote. But he continues to provide this aid for this mass slaughter of Palestinians that's happening. So there has been this increasing dissent within the Biden administration and the Democratic Party against Biden's full-throated support for the mass killing of Palestinians. And this incident at this church kind of shows that, it's actually the 3rd time in recent weeks that a Biden speech was interrupted by pro-ceasefire protesters. So this goes to show that this is something he's going to be dealing with, especially as he's going around campaigning. I think we might see stuff like this happen pretty frequently. And 17 Biden campaign staffers recently signed a letter to President Biden protesting his support for Israel's campaign. And they said that volunteers are quitting in droves over this issue. So he's definitely in trouble. All right. So the next one here, Israeli MK supports genocide case against Israel. So a member of the Israeli Knesset has come out in support of South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. So this is Ofer Kassif. He is the member of the left-wing Jewish and Arab Hadash Ta'al party, and I know he's Jewish himself. So Kassif and around 200 other Israelis have signed a petition supporting South Africa's 84-page filing that will be submitted to the ICJ later this week. The petition is going to be submitted later this week. So the petition reads, quote, "The information that emerges from the lawsuit is both horrific and credible. Israel is indeed taking systematic and thorough steps to wipe out the population of Gaza, to starve, abuse, and displace. It has implemented a policy of erasing options for livelihood, which is leading to genocide," end quote. So explaining his reasoning for signing the petition, Kassif wrote on X, quote, "My constitutional duty is to Israeli society and all of its residents, not to a government and its coalition members who call for ethnic cleansing and even actual genocide. They are the ones that harm the country and its people. They are the ones who led South Africa to approach The Hague, not me and my cabinet members," end quote. Kassif added that he will not give up the fight. I didn't put the quote in there. I have to add that. So he said, quote, "I will not give up the fight for our existence as a moral society. This is the true patriotism. No revenge wars and calls for extermination. No unnecessary bloodshed. And no sacrifice of kidnapped citizens and soldiers in false wars," end quote. So Kassif's position has enraged many in the Knesset, including MK Oded Furor, and he's a member of the Yisrael Beitani party. I probably butchered that, but he's calling for Kassif's removal, and he's looking to collect 70 signatures that he needs to move toward launching impeachment proceedings for Kassif. And I know Kassif has been critical of this, what Israel's doing in Gaza, this whole time, critical of the occupation. But this definitely takes courage to do when you know that most people are going to be outraged, the people that you're surrounded by. So the ICJ is holding its first hearing on the case on January 11th and 12th. And the thing, that South Africa is asking for first, because the decision could take a few years, but they're asking for the ICJ to declare that Israel is carrying out what could be genocidal actions and then order a halt to the military operation. All right, so the next one here, Israeli lawmakers say it out loud, mass migration from Gaza. So this is an article from Haaretz, the Israeli outlet, and it covers this caucus meeting in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset, between Israeli right-wing lawmakers talking about what they want in the Gaza Strip, mass migration and Jewish settlements. So far-right lawmaker Tzvi Sukkot. I'm going to, Israeli names that I don't know. There's going to be a lot in this story that I might really butcher. But anyway, so Sukkot had only 30 seconds to speak at the caucus to strengthen the awareness of Israeli victory at the Knesset last week. If you're a hardliner, he did not disappoint. So he said, quote, "This event must end in a way that resounds everywhere in the Arab world. Among the Arabs of Israel and Syria and Lebanon, everyone must see what has happened to Gaza and to understand that this is the last thing he wants to happen in his life." He added, "At least in the northern Gaza Strip, we first have to conquer, annex, destroy all the houses, build neighborhoods, large and expansive neighborhoods, large settlements in that place that will be named after our heroes, after the nation's heroes who fought there. We will distribute free plots there to the soldiers who fought, to the wounded who fought. This image and this most important thing of the destroyed Gaza, of Palestine Square that will become Israeli Heroism Square, this image will echo in every home around the world so that everyone will see what happens to those who mess with the people of Israel," end quote. So, I mean, you talk about an incitement of genocide, calling for the destruction of a people. That's exactly what that is. So this caucus, which was established even before Israel's most right-wing Knesset took over in November 2022, debated the topic how Israel's victory will look at the end of the war. Among the few women around the table were legendary settler leader Daniela Weiss and right-wing commenter Nave Dromi. While the members of the narrow war cabinet seemed to weigh every word, both about the war and the 129 hostages still being held by Hamas, at the caucus meeting, Israel's hard right let loose. Every time someone mentioned the resettlement of Gaza, loud applause erupted in the audience. Moderates were at a premium. So a former centrist center-right lawmaker said that if Hamas military leaders remain in Gaza, they must be expelled as the heads of the Palestine Liberation Organization were expelled from Lebanon back in 1982. So according to the caucus chairman of Ohad Tal, who is a member of Bezalel Smotrich's religious Zionism party. So Smotrich is the Israeli finance minister, one of the ones calling for the so-called voluntary migration. So anyway, this guy Tal said, quote, "The goal of the war must be full control over the Gaza Strip. Gaza was the state of Israel. It must return to being the territory of the state of Israel," end quote. And then there was another chairman that had milder rhetoric, not going as far with the rhetoric there. So they also had a quote in here from the Israeli intelligence minister that I wanted to go over. So this is Gila Gamliel. She's according to Haaretz, she's a relative moderate in the Likud party. And she wrote an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post calling for Palestinian refugees to, scatter across the world, basically. But she spoke at this, and this is what she said. Quote, "The Hamas regime has collapsed. There's no municipal authority. The civilian population is entirely dependent on humanitarian aid from outside. There's a lack of job opportunities and high unemployment. 60% of Gaza's agricultural areas will be turned into buffer zones. Much of the terrorist infrastructure will have been destroyed. Thousands of homes are unsafe to live in. The IDF is continuing with its military operations in the Gaza Strip." So she said the idea of transferring responsibility for Gaza to the Palestinian Authority is, quote, "dangerous for Israel. The PA already controlled Gaza and was removed by force by Hamas." Basically saying no PA. Her idea was an interim administration, saying that the Gaza Strip should be transferred to international control led by the U.S., Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. So sort of this idea of an international coalition occupying Gaza. I haven't heard her say that before. I know recently, again, she said that the kicking all the Palestinians out is the best solution for Israel. But these are the discussions that are happening in the Israeli parliament. And they try to say that it's not the plan, that they don't want to kick the Palestinians out. All right, so the next one here, Israel is choking aid deliveries into Gaza. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Senator Chris Van Hollen, he's a Democrat from Maryland, he described the Israeli inspection protocols in Gaza as severely restrictive and that Tel Aviv should face consequences for preventing aid from the besieged enclave. Israel has restricted aid deliveries into Gaza to just a fraction of pre-war levels. So on CBS's Face the Nation, Van Hollen explained that Israel's inspection process for aid entering Gaza are choking aid deliveries into the Strip. He said, quote, "And when one item on a truck is rejected, the entire truck is rejected. And according to all the international organizations that we talked about who have been operating in conflict zones around the world, they've never seen a worse process for assuring the safe delivery of humanitarian assistance." End quote. And when he was asked if Israel should face consequences for restricting aid, he said, quote, "Yes, I do think there have to be consequences," end quote. And he said that Biden and Blinken have been right to insist on a reduction in civilian casualties, even though they're not, they're still supporting the war no matter what, still supporting the slaughter. Van Hollen said that they haven't seen that there has been no reduction basically in civilian casualties, and that's unacceptable. So more criticism of Israel growing from a Democrat. I don't really know much about Van Hollen to really say if this is a big deal that he said this or I mean, it's still, I guess, kind of, mild criticism. I mean, he should be calling to cut them off altogether, but I guess, we're going to, can't just expect that. At first, we're going to hopefully see this type of stuff grow. All right, so the next one here. U.S. flies fighter jet over Bosnia in threat to Serbs. So the United States flew 2 F-16 fighter jets over Bosnia and Herzegovina on Monday as a show of force meant as a threat to Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik, who wants independence for the Serb majority area of the country he controls. Dodik is the president of the Republic Srpska, which is a semi-autonomous Serb republic within the borders of Bosnia-Herzegovina that's separate from the other part of the country that's mainly populated by Bosniak Muslims and Croats, and that is known as the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So these boundaries were set by the 1995 Dayton Accords, and they're called the Dayton Accords because they were negotiated in Dayton, Ohio. And they were negotiated following a U.S. and NATO intervention against the Serbs in this ethnic conflict. And I don't know much. I really do need to learn more about this conflict. And I know most people don't even really know about it, the U.S. and NATO intervention. This was part of what was once Yugoslavia. More people, I think, are familiar with Kosovo in 1998. But this is also a big one. And so, this just really amazes me, stories like this, because it shows how involved the U.S. is in all over the world in this dispute, ethnic feud in Bosnia. And so anyway, the U.S. Embassy in Sarajevo said that the F-16 fighter jets flew over Bosnia to show U.S. support for the country's territorial integrity. So the statement said, quote, "This bilateral training is an example of advanced military-to-military cooperation that contributes to peace and security in the Western Balkans, as well as demonstrates the United States' commitment to ensuring the territorial integrity of Bosnia-Herzegovina in the face of anti-Dayton and secessionist activities," end quote. And the United States, this statement also said that the U.S. underscores that the Dayton Accords have no right of secession and the Constitution of Bosnia provides no right of secession. So Dodik he's not outright saying that he's going to secede, but he's calling for more autonomy. There's policies that he's against. I don't know too much about the situation, but he recently told AP that he will continue to pursue the interests of, the Serb kind of nationalist interests despite threats from the U.S. He said this on December 30th, quote, "I am not irrational. I know that America's response will be to use force, but I have no reason to be frightened by that into sacrificing Serb national interests," end quote. So James O'Brien, who's the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, he recently threatened that the U.S. will act if anyone threatens the term of the Dayton Accords and said nobody in the country has the right to secession. So, again, it's just one of those things, It's amazing how involved the U.S. still is in that part of the world. All right, so the next one here, F-16 transfer to Ukraine delayed for another 6 months. This is another one from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. The Western plan to transfer advanced American-made fighter jets to Ukraine has hit another delay and is now expected to reach the battlefield during the second quarter of this year. Washington has said it does not expect the warplanes to alter the course of the war. However, Russia views the F-16s as a national security threat as the aircraft are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. So a Danish newspaper reported that 6 F-16s Denmark was scheduled to transfer at the start of 2024 are being delayed by at least 6 months. And it's not really clear exactly why. Some of the pilot courses they're still training. I'm not sure exactly when the training is going to be done. One Danish official said that it can stretch into 2025. I know there's also training going on in the U.S. Not sure how long, when that's going to wrap up. But Ukraine's been asking for these F-16s for a while, and it looks like it just keeps getting pushed back and pushed back. All right, so the last one here, the White House stands by Lloyd Austin as bipartisan furor grows. So a lot of people in Congress are very angry that Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, was hospitalized in an ICU and was out of commission for a few days. And he didn't tell Biden. The Pentagon did not tell the White House. But the White House is standing by Austin, the former Raytheon board member. So White House officials on Monday reiterated the president's support for Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who said he did not intend to resign in the face of sharp bipartisan criticism for failing to disclose his emergency hospitalization to administration officials or Congress for several days. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said that there are no plans other than for Secretary Austin to stay in his job. So on January 1st, Austin was admitted to the intensive care unit at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center after complications from a December 22nd elective surgery. Austin did not communicate his medical status to the White House for 3 days, though some staff members said they learned of his condition on January 2nd. Congressional leaders, including the top Democrat and Republican on both the House and the Senate Armed Service Committees, have questioned Austin's lack of transparency. Some Republicans have gone even further. Representative Eli Stefanik, Republican from New York, has called on Austin to step down and for Congress to launch a formal investigation into the incident. So, again, the White House is still sticking by him. And this made me think, Biden administration going into its last year, there hasn't been any resignations or firings of top-level officials. Nobody's really changed positions when it comes to the upper echelon. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from John Walsh: in American appeals to Taiwan, don't vote to be Ukraine 2.0. And that's about Taiwan's elections, which are coming up on January 13th. So if the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, wins again, they're currently the party in power. They're very independence-minded and moving closer and closer to the U.S., which angers China and is making war seem more likely in the region. The polling shows that they could win. Things have kind of changed. The Kuomintang, which has always been the main opposition, has been the main opposition party as the DPP held power over the past 8 years. The Taiwan's People's Party, which is a relatively new party, was overtaking the Kuomintang in the polls, but now the Kuomintang is ahead of the TPP. but not quite beating the DPP. The Kuomintang would, is more Beijing friendly. So is the TPP as well. Not as much, from what I understand, not as much as the Kuomintang. But anyway, this election's a big deal from our perspective because I think if the DPP wins again, they're going to be kind of emboldened to even increase, try to get accept all this military aid and other types of support that the U.S. is ready to give them. One from Ted Snyder, pressing the triggers that could lead to 2 wider wars. One from Caitlin Johnstone, CNN and Washington Post busted for pro-Israel propaganda shenanigans. One from William J. Astore, the madness of threat inflation. And one from Justin Amash, bringing the troops home is not isolationism. So that's everything for me for today. You could always help us out by sharing this show, like, subscribe on YouTube, or wherever you prefer to watch. Leave a rating or a review if you listen to the audio. That's it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.